How are things in California?
Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone.
I mean,
So this is live
she had a
now?
lot of issues.
Yes, it's on.
There isn't a way to mute us?
Nope. That's it.
Have you know, I came away from the gold medal hockey game for this.
We were the replay. Do not tell us. We don't
Don't tell
want
us.
to. We don't want to know who won.
I can't measure up to that.
But no, man,
Man, we taped it last night at 10 p.m. It seems a little late to stay up to watch.
you doing all right?
Finley and Russia.
You don't usually wear a jacket.
Well, I'm.
We're assuming Putin's not
Well, I
going to
know
be
that.
major until the Olympics are
You'd
over.
asked me last Sunday was I gonna be purposely today, I would have said, well, no.
Backed by popular demand.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think it's backed by
Okay, I'll be in the
who
back
would
room
do it
if
today.
anyone, if it ends up having any
I don't
problems.
know, it was,
Good morning.
Good
morning, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Anybody reach out
How's
to
your
you?
whole family?
Carrie and Lee?
We're doing well.
How? Is there a how?
Trucking along.
Yeah, well, I'm trucking over to Gibraltar.
I thought that's what Sarah said.
Yeah,
Oh,
it,
hey,
it,
hey.
it's been,
Oh, hey, Wilson.
I mean, it could be way worse. It could be way worse.
Trey had gotten COVID
Sort of the wording page today.
a little bit later in the middle of January, but, real nice.
Looking like we are.
I always find that so
What we do is
interesting.
have,
But, you know,
people have the opportunity to.
and then there's families that they all get it, they just can't seem to cut, you know, like get rid of it. And
They were all vaccinated too. He hadn't gotten his booster yet because he wasn't old enough.
So it's either that one time.
So maybe that, yeah.
Very much like
Queen has it now.
Who does?
Queen.
I do need.
Oh, I hadn't heard.
Who else? Kamala had had it.
I suppose we need to get.
I think Kamala infected her deliberately so she could become queen sooner.
You got some real.
Oh, boy.
Community there.
Start that rumor.
I might not, I wasn't.
I did think about that. No, the kid is the
I don't
Kamala was good.
think
The queen. Queen Elizabeth.
Very
Doesn't sound terribly old.
Yeah. Yeah, last time it was like kind of around.
Well, actually. This building has worked out pretty well.
Yeah, this is my first time
When
being.
we started out, we had the platform that was. Figure out how that fireplace was like it needed to get its own thing. We had services. Everybody came in a little late, walking the whole congregation down, get into their chair. Good morning, Beth.
Yeah.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. How are all of you?
Good. Good. I read what you were playing today, and I need to get, did you get a bullet? I'm gonna go grab one. I saw what you were playing, but I didn't really take it in, so. let me look. Okay. Okay.
Were you Baptist?
You know those pieces well.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I was just looking to make sure it wasn't one out there.
Wise.
Well, I had about a 40-minute conversation.
Oh, you did? Oh.
the other kid? This looks a little. How's that? He's very.
Good morning, sir. Hey, Robert, how are you? Hi, how's it going? Is it set up? It must be.
Sooner rather than later. I should the grandkids know.
Can I see you at the thing yesterday? How are you, my friend? Nobody pays me anymore. I guess all it really means is that fill out those forms every year and send them.
That's a bonus.
It is. Let's do it up in.
Really
Maybe he speaks
slow.
Take down that hill at about 80 and
I'll take close to the Vikings.
It's in the original one. This is
I got it. Well, you start your baby's hands and shake. Things like that, they start this. We started at Bayshore Ranch on the beach. We started at Bayshore Ranch. You go to the museum and there's the Viking village and there's the great invention. And Armin turned that picture. So, I was. Who cares?
My best friend.
Dad had somebody come in and help him. It wasn't done in a nice stainless steel. I don't like to be out because I can't get like yeah, service, but still looking.
I like the little light that you see. I like the little light that you
Yeah, no, it's gonna be a big game. I don't know if they're gonna win, but
Are you planning to speak without the mask?
Good. That would be perfect. I don't think we need to do a mic check. I think we're okay with
That's easy.
Is it anywhere? Yeah.
Mike Brown.
How are you?
Good, how you doing? Good to see you. Looking forward to hearing about the exits. I took a class with Phil Hansolia,
Oh.
and we talked all about what's going on down there. It's fascinating.
Yeah,
So,
no, it's an iconic story.
yeah, great.
What's that? Well, who are you? Hi. Good, how are you? Pretty indeed. Oh, my.
Hopefully not of himself.
No, I have, no.
So why don't we do yours? Okay. So I just made it happen. So I'm looking at my Are you gonna tell her about our walk? Yes.
Thank you, Beth. Good morning. 2 weeks in a row, and we've got a slightly growing crowd. That's nice to see. I wasn't planning to be your service leader 2 weeks in a row. Thank you, Mary. I wasn't planning to be your service leader 2 weeks in a row, but it's always enjoyable to do it. My name is Bob Lindahl, and so it's a privilege for me to be here with you today, too. Each week, I think most of us who are service leaders try to have something that helps us focus on who we are as Unitarian Universalists at the beginning. And something has been floating around in the last week or so that I thought is appropriate for us. I enjoy reading the Prayer of St. Francis, but this one is called the Reverse St. Francis Prayer. And just as most Unitarians, Universalists are reverse in some way or another, it should probably ring true, hopefully. There's, "Oh, make me a channel of disturbance. Where there is apathy, let me provoke. Where there is compliance, let me bring questioning. Where there is silence, may I be a voice. Where there is too much comfort and too little action, grant disruption. Where there are doors closed and hearts locked, grant the willingness to listen. When laws dictate and pain is overlooked, when tradition speaks louder than need, grant that I may seek rather to do justice than to talk about it. Disturb me. To be with as well as for the alienated, to love the unlovable as well as the lovely. Oh, make me a channel of disturbance." And I'd like to ask Brother Terry if he will bring the microphone around. We appreciate if visitors would, if they feel comfortable, would stand and introduce themselves, or people who maybe haven't been with us for a little while. We'd appreciate if you would let us know who you are, perhaps where you're from, and so forth. So is there anyone here today that would like to do that? Okay, let's go on then. We would ask if anyone else has announcements, raise your hand and we will be glad to come around with the microphone. Quiet day. Okay. I have just one announcement. I have a spare ticket for the Jonathan Bass concert at 3:00 this afternoon at the Cress Auditorium. So I've got one extra. That's probably the last. I don't know if there are any others available, but I have one ticket. Okay, Mark, it's yours. Okay.
No. I've got something I want to say.
Oh, okay. All right, Mark has something he wants to say. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So you can come to the concert with me too.
Oh.
So I just want to remind everybody that this is the third Sunday, and our contributions are going to the Food Pantry Collaborative of Door County to help put food in the pantries. So please give.
Thank you. As a last count from last month, we had a little over $1,600 come in, and I don't have a current figure, but where we're at on that, but we're well on our way to meeting our goal for this quarter. So we thank everyone for that. Just a couple of other things before we begin our service this morning. We ask that you remember to silence phones and anything else that might make noise before we start our service today. We don't pass an offering plate these days, so if you're planning to give to the third Sunday offering and have that available today, there are some plates in obvious locations out in the entryway. We'd ask that you use those or use the online platform or send a check in. We will have a talk back today, starting about 5 minutes after the service is over. So I'm going to guess maybe starting at about 10:50 or something like that. But we'll meet over in this area of the sanctuary, and we look forward to any participation that you have with that. So our speaker today is Jim Honig, and Jim is not a stranger to most of us. So we welcome you here today, Jim. Jim is pastor, has been a Lutheran pastor for 33 years, served parishes in Missouri, Florida, Illinois, and now is the pastor at Shepherd of the Bay Lutheran Church in Ellison Bay. He's a writer, blogger, and has even written a novel. Jim has been very active and respected in the Door County community, and he serves currently as president of the Door County Housing Partnership, which is working to provide permanently affordable homeownership to opportunities to year-round workforce. So anyway, we're happy to have you here, Jim. Now we're ready to begin our service. We have words today from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, Ukraine. The exodus from Egypt occurs in every person, in every era, in every year, and in every day. And now we'd ask that you would rise as you're able to recite the unison affirmation and hum the doxology. We gather together to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate within the caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives. It's always good when we have a time to share those joys that are bringing our hearts joy and those concerns that might be weighing us down. So if you have any joys or concerns, would you please raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone around.
I know several of you will be very sad to hear that Joni Lewis died on Thursday night of COVID. She'd been in the hospital for over 3 weeks. So there'll be something in the summer, and I'm sure something soon in the paper.
Pam, good. I'm sure this is a joy for all of Door County, and you probably all read about it in the previous week's Peninsula Pulse, but the Door County Maritime Museum and Lighthouse Preservation Society was awarded a $1.75 million grant to do whatever they need to promote tourism, but primarily to finish all the exhibits in the new lighthouse. And of course, it's a special joy for us because our son-in-law is Sam Perlman, who's the deputy director of the Maritime Museum, and he was influential in writing the grant, et cetera.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think there was another significant grant. Mike, what was that? Was that for housing or?
Well, the grant that Pam was referring to was from the ARPA, the federal, what was it, the American Rescue Plan Act. That was passed by the Biden administration. And that money also, the county also received, I think it was $5.3 million to the United Way for childcare out of that same program. 3.5. 3.5 million, not 5.3.
I'm gonna put in the other two.
Good. Anyone else have a joy or concern? Okay. My concern is that I'm going to be heading back for Illinois tomorrow morning. When I heard that the snow was coming on Monday afternoon and into late Tuesday evening, dumping at least a foot of snow with 25-mile-an-hour winds or so up here, I told Wilma, boy, it'd be nice, she's down there right now, and I said, it'd be nice if I wish I could be up here. And she said, well, why don't you stay? And I thought about it a couple of days, and I was telling someone, I just didn't sense quite the enthusiasm in her voice that there should have been there for that. So I am going to head back tomorrow morning. I look forward, I'll be back in a couple of weeks. So, okay, at this time, we will move in to our moment of quiet. We've had some introduction to our service today, some thoughts and some sharing with each other. Now it's time to quiet our hearts and as we prepare for the message that Jim will deliver for us today.
Well, let me first of all say what a delight it is to be with you this morning. As I've gotten around in the community, I've met so many of you. And I have such respect and admiration and affection for the UU community. You may be small, but you are mighty. And I feel a deep, deep kinship with you because of your commitments to matters pertaining to justice. The reading this morning is from the Torah, the book of Exodus. I'm reading from Robert Alter's absolutely beautiful new translation of the Torah. The words themselves are beautiful, but the cover art is also quite beautiful. From chapter 3. As Moses was herding the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, priest of Midian, and he drove the flock into the wilderness and came to the mountains of God, to Horeb. And the Lord's messenger appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of the bush. And he saw, and look, the bush was burning with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses thought, let me, pray, turn aside that I may see this great sight, why the bush does not burn up. And the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, and God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. And he said, come no closer here, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place you are standing on is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I indeed have seen the abuse of my people that is in Egypt, and its outcry because of its taskmasters. I have heard, for I know its pain. And I have come down to rescue it from the hand of Egypt, and to bring up from that land to a goodly and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite and the Hittite and the Amorite and the Perizzite and the Hivite and the Jebusite. And now look, the outcry of the Israelites has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. And now go that I may send you to Pharaoh, and bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring out the Israelites from Egypt? And he said, for I will be with you. And this is the sign for you that I myself have sent you. When you bring the people out from Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain. And Moses said to God, look, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, Ahyeh Asher Ahyeh, I will be who I will be. And he said, thus shall you say to the Israelites, Ahyeh has sent me to you. And God said further to Moses, thus shall you say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob sent me to you. That is my name forever. And thus I am invoked in all the ages. Well, I've chosen this morning to speak on the broad sweep of this Exodus story from the Hebrew Scriptures. The stories from the Hebrew and Christian Scriptures are useful not only to illustrate the Christian gospel, that's what I do every Sunday morning, but they are also stories that teach wisdom about how to live a meaningful life and how to live meaningfully within community. And it's from that perspective this morning that I'd like to speak on the Exodus story. The skeleton of my remarks find their source in a marvelous commentary by Leon Kass. Professor Kass has enjoyed a long career teaching philosophy and social thought at the University of Chicago, and his commentaries on Genesis and Exodus are among the finest commentaries that I have ever read, and approach those two books of the Torah from the perspective of gaining wisdom. So what might this ancient story have to say to us for our civic life in these challenging times? Well, let me first of all review the contours of the story. I don't want to take anything for granted. At the end of Genesis, the sons of Jacob come into Egypt as a clan. And over the course of generations, between the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus, they grow into a formidable people, hundreds of thousands, potentially a force to be reckoned with. Or at least that's what the Pharaoh feared. Partly as a way to keep the Hebrews in check, the ruling powers of Egypt made them slaves, and over time they increased the burden of the oppression and the violence and the suffering. And so God promises to deliver them, and as we heard in the reading this morning, God raises up Moses as the deliverer. And that Exodus story then recounts a series of miraculous events whereby the Israelites were delivered out of slavery in Egypt. And then the middle part of the book chronicles their 40-year sojourn in the wilderness, a time when God forges them into a nation. And in the midst of the long journey, God makes a covenant with them, giving them the law which will govern all aspects of their lives. And finally, just before delivering them into the promised land, God commands them to build a tabernacle. And that tabernacle becomes the place where they will worship their Creator and have the chance to be in contact with God in their midst. And so 3 parts of the story: a story of deliverance, a code of law and morality, and an aspiration to something larger than themselves. Now, for generations, that Exodus story has been iconic. It's been a story that has formed people, both Jewish people and Christian people. Every year at Passover, the Jewish families ritually retell the story. And the Exodus story, too, is foundational for Christian celebration of the Eucharist and for our understanding of the meaning of Jesus' death and resurrection. And so it's a story that we own. That story's in our bones. We refer to it all the time. Well, Kass suggests that the first fundamental pillar of building a strong nation is a common story. Do you remember Leon Uris's blockbuster novel in the 1960s of the forming of the modern nation of Israel? And what did he call it? Exodus, yeah. And so what's our national story? I'll tell you the story I grew up with. I grew up the story of American exceptionalism, manifest destiny. America is the city on a hill. America is the force for good around the world. And we can be assured that every 4 years, every candidate for president of both parties will craft their own version of that story of American exceptionalism. And certainly there's truth in that narrative. Almost from the beginning, we have been the land of opportunity for many people from many different places. And of course, that was something relatively new in human history. For millennia, people died pretty much in the same state as they had been born into. If your dad was a poor laborer, you were probably going to die a poor laborer. There was no such thing as upward mobility. But in America, for many people, it has become possible to rise above one's station, one's birth station in life. But that story is increasingly contested. And we have become aware of how that story doesn't really ring true for every American. And while America has worked for many, it also contains in its past a different story, a story that is brutal and violent, a history of oppression and genocide, of power exercised in hideous and terrifying and grossly immoral ways. You know, we can think, for instance, of the near erasure of indigenous peoples who lived and thrived on this continent for millennia before the arrival of the Europeans. We think of the more than 250 years of chattel slavery defended and rationalized through the made-up category of race, or the violent fight for civil rights after the Civil War, a fight that continues to this day, the violent and often arrogant enforcement of American power and hegemony in every corner of the globe, patriarchy, homophobia, and the list goes on. So I ask again, what is our national story? Well, I believe that for us to find a common story, that national story has to include both the good we've done and also an honest reckoning with the troubling side of our history. As you well know, there's a growing movement to erase the darker side of our history because it makes people feel uncomfortable. But I believe that story has to include both sides, both the good and the evil, the moral and the immoral, the ways in which America has been a city on a hill, and the ways in which we have also suppressed the light. In fact, I think that our refusal to reckon with both sides of that story has prevented us from making the progress that we need in order for this to truly be the land of opportunity for everyone. And I think, for instance, of the contrast between the way we have dealt or not dealt with the troubling sides of our history in contrast to the way South Africa, for instance, has dealt with the evil of apartheid. When the racist regime ended, they set up a truth and reconciliation process, and they brought into the same room both victims and perpetrators, not for the sake of punishment and retribution, but for the sake of honesty and reconciliation. And so the victims were able to be heard, and the perpetrators had to deal with that discomfort of knowing the harm they had done. And in the aftermath of that process, while South Africa, of course, is no perfect democracy, they have made much more progress in a much shorter time. And I believe that a good deal of that progress is due to their determination to honesty and transparency in crafting that national story. So a second pillar comes from the middle part of Exodus. God gave to the Israelites a system of law and morality that held them together as a people and that guided them in every aspect of their lives. And it's not such a huge stretch to make that connection between the giving of the law on Mount Sinai and the founding of our country. Our country was forged on that foundation of Judeo-Christian ethics and morality. And the founders of our nation understood that a nation has to be built on a codified set of laws that guide our common life. And so for a society to work well and for its citizens to thrive, it's a fundamental necessity for people to be governed under the law. And that rule of law has been eroding for the past generations. Now, we could probably sit here and talk for the next 3 or 4 hours about the various reasons that have contributed to that erosion, but let me just mention 2 of them that are pertinent to our reflection on the Exodus. One of them is the erosion of the social institutions that form us in moral life. Churches and other religious communities, civic organizations, service clubs, neighborhood associations. These are the institutions where we learn and form ourselves in the morality that enables us to live well together. And when the institutions crumble, so does the morality in which they formed us. And I'm just convinced that the rebuilding of these institutions is crucial for our life together. We will all be better off when we work to rebuild and strengthen these fundamental institutions. You know, I see myself as, in my calling as a pastor, it's primarily a religious and spiritual calling, but I think also secondarily, and maybe almost as importantly, it's a social and societal calling to help build an institution that contributes to the thriving of the community in which it exists. Another trend that I think has undermined the rule of law is a gradual shift from the language of duty to the language of rights. We highly value the notion of freedom in the American ethos. We are, after all, the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's interesting that though the Israelites were being delivered from slavery in Egypt, the concept of freedom never appears in that story. In the Exodus story, their freedom was a deliverance from oppression in order to serve. Freedom, in our context, has come to mean an ability to do whatever I want, which of course was never the understanding of freedom. Freedom is not a license to do whatever you want. Freedom always implies a responsibility to a larger community. And in the case of the Israelites, it was a freedom from the power of the oppressor, a coercive and violent and brutalizing power. And the freedom was for the sake of living in community, a freedom which always involves a commitment and obligation to the neighbor. I don't think you will find ever in the Hebrew or Christian scriptures a discussion of individual rights, which I think is quite interesting. By contrast, there is all over the place a talk about duty and obligation. Out of our love for God flows a duty and obligation to our neighbor, to our common life, and to the common good. So the last section of Exodus has a long account of the instructions for and the construction of the tabernacle, a reminder of God in the midst of the Israelites and of God's promise to always be with them. And it points to the third pillar for building a strong nation, the notion that we live for something beyond ourselves, something higher and more important than our own comfort and safety. Most of you will probably remember, I think you are of the age, the book that came out over now 30 years ago by Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. We probably all read that, right? One of the early exercises in that book has the reader write their obituary. Do you remember that? What do you want to be remembered for? I've done that exercise with parishioners over the years. And I find that almost universally, people want to be remembered for their character, for how they've related to their family and their community, for how their lives have mattered and made a difference. Now, culturally, we're conditioned to strive for the shiny things, right? For the possessions and the money. But when we stop and think about it, of course, we realize that those are not the most important things in life. We want to live in such a way that we've made something out of this gift of existence. We recognize that life is precious and we only get one chance at it. And so we want to make sure that we're making something out of this astonishing opportunity to live in this amazing world. So where does that leave us? Well, I've mentioned that all three of these pillars have eroded over the past 40 years or so, and maybe even the erosion has sped up in the 21st century. And so it begs the question, is there any hope for our future? Well, personally, it's hard for me to feel optimistic about rebuilding our common life from Washington, D.C. In my estimation, there's just too much money and too much corruption at play on both sides of the aisle. And those who hold the power, as it has happened throughout human history, those who hold the power have little reason to change. And yet I am a hopeful person. And I believe that we can rebuild our common life, but it's not going to happen from the top down. It's going to happen from the bottom up. I'm enormously hopeful that it can be repaired from the bottom up. I am enormously hopeful that working together, we can make a tremendous impact in the communities where we live. In fact, most social movements that are successful do not happen from the top down, they happen from the bottom up. Those who hold the power are notoriously conservative when it comes to any change. And so successful social movements happen from the bottom up. We all know the contours and the public personalities and the public events of the civil rights movement. But what we often don't know is that it had its foundations in the hundreds of students that went door to door in the rural South, and the hundreds of primarily Black women who met in their small churches in the rural communities in the South, who organized themselves to mobilize African American persons to vote. I am involved in the community, as Bob said, the president of a young not-for-profit seeking to address the affordable housing crisis in the community. I'm on the board of the Door County United Way. And in both of those organizations, I see not only the work we're doing, but I see the support and the rally and the enthusiasm of the community. I get around and I talk to people like you, people who are also hopeful and who are working because we know we can do better, and we are going to make it better in our community from the bottom up. And so I'm here this morning to say to you, let's work together. And these lessons from Exodus will give us some light for the path forward, to forge a common story that is truthful, to restore the norm of living together under the law for the sake of the common good, and to remember that a life of meaning and wisdom is a life that is lived for something higher than our own comfort or safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. As we get ready to extinguish the chalice today, I would like to, you have to excuse me, I would like to do something. I pushed the wrong button here. Hold on a minute. That was supposed to go seamlessly. Okay, here we go. At any rate, I have a song, Jewish song here that comes out of Isaiah. I'd like to play that before we extinguish the chalice today. And you're invited to stand up if you'd like. In fact, I think if we would all stand up when I play this and just remain standing until I put out the chalice. But you're invited to clap, you're invited to sing it, you're invited to dance in the aisles if you wish. But this teaches us, I think, about going out into the way we're supposed to be going out of here to do what Jim was talking about this morning.
You're gonna want this for the talk now.
Yes, I will.
$3 Mariah.
Hi, Jim. My name is Gloria. I'm a strong supporter of the House of
Thank you all for joining our service. The Zoom talkback will start shortly, so check for Sarah's email in your inbox to find directions to get into that. We'll see you next week.